Somerset, England, April 1817. The iron gates of Ashmore Park stood open like the jaws of some great beast, swallowing the prison carriage that carried Seraphina Jane Lockhart toward a fate she had not chosen but could not refuse. Rain fell in sheets across the Somerset countryside, turning the long gravel drive into a grey river that reflected nothing but clouds and her own bleak future. At 23, Seraphina had learned precisely what it meant to be the daughter of a traitor. 3 months had passed since her father's execution for financing the radical Spencean philanthropists and their conspiracy against the crown. 3 months since the Lockhart name became synonymous with treachery and shame. The fashionable London townhouse had been seized, the country estate sold to pay debts, and her mother dead of grief within a fortnight of the hanging. Everything Seraphina had known, every certainty of her privileged life, had been stripped away and replaced with this. A marriage contract signed by men in government offices, a bargain struck to settle accounts she had never tallied. The carriage lurched to a halt before a manor house that rose from the mist like something from a Gothic novel, all grey stone and narrow windows that seemed to watch her arrival with suspicion. If stories of love born from the ashes of ruin and redemption move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. The carriage door opened, and a servant in Westbrook livery stood waiting, his face carefully blank as he extended a hand to help her descend. Seraphina gathered her worn travelling cloak around her shoulders and stepped into the rain, her half-boots sinking slightly into gravel that had turned to mud. No one came to greet her. No mistress of the house appeared at the entrance to welcome the new Viscountess. There was only the servant, whose name she did not know, leading her through a heavy oak door into an entrance hall that smelled of beeswax, damp wool, and something older that might have been sorrow. "His lordship is in the library, my lady," the servant said, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond her left shoulder. "He asks that you join him there." Seraphina followed the man through corridors lined with portraits of Westbrook ancestors, whose painted eyes judged her with the same cold assessment that all of London society had employed these past months. The library door stood ajar, warm golden light from an argand lamp spilling into the dim hallway. The servant knocked twice, received a curt acknowledgement, and stepped aside to let her enter alone. Gabriel Westbrook, Viscount Ashmore, stood with his back to the door, staring out a rain-streaked window that overlooked gardens, slowly drowning in the April downpour. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a coat of dark blue superfine that spoke of London tailoring. Though the house around them suggested he had not seen the capital in some time, his hair was darker than she had expected, almost black in the dim light, cut shorter than current fashion dictated. "Miss Lockhart," he said without turning, his voice carrying the crisp accent of a man educated at Oxford and trained in diplomatic circles. Or should I say, Lady Ashmore? The ceremony this morning was brief enough that I barely recall speaking the vows, but I trust the Crown Solicitor explained the terms of our arrangement adequately before I departed. Seraphina's hands tightened on her reticule. "He explained that my alternatives were this marriage or trial for treason by association, my lord. The terms seemed remarkably clear." Gabriel turned then, and she saw his face for the first time. He was handsome in the way of men who have known suffering, his features sharp and aristocratic, but marked by lines of fatigue around his eyes and mouth. Those eyes were grey, she noted, the colour of the storm outside, and they assessed her with the same careful detachment she imagined he had once employed in negotiating treaties. "Then we understand each other," he said. "This is a transaction, Miss Lockhart. The government needed to dispose of you without the spectacle of a trial that would resurrect uncomfortable questions about your father's co-conspirators. I needed the political rehabilitation that only service to the Crown could provide. Our marriage serves both purposes admirably." "How fortunate for us both," Seraphina replied, keeping her voice steady despite the humiliation that burned in her chest. She had known this was no love match, had expected no tender welcome, but the cold precision of his words struck like a physical blow. "Your rooms have been prepared in the East Wing," Gabriel continued, moving to the desk that dominated one side of the library and shuffling papers with obvious dismissal. "We will maintain separate quarters. You will have an allowance sufficient for your needs, and the servants have been instructed to accord you the respect due to your position." I ask only that you remain here at Ashmore Park. London society has no interest in seeing either of us, and I have no desire to subject myself to their particular brand of cruelty." "And if I wish to leave?" Serafina asked, though she knew the answer. "The marriage contract stipulates that any attempt to abandon this union will result in the immediate resumption of charges against you," Gabriel said without inflection. "Your freedom, such as it is, exists only within the bounds of this arrangement. I suggest you make yourself comfortable, Lady Ashmore. We are both prisoners here, though the walls are stone rather than iron." He returned his attention to his papers, and Serafina understood that she had been dismissed. The same servant who had met her at the door materialized to guide her to her chambers, and she followed numbly, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality of her situation. She had traded the hangman's noose for a different kind of death, one that would be slow and cold and utterly isolated. The east wing proved to be elegant but austere, furnished with pieces that spoke of good taste and considerable age. Her bedchamber overlooked the same drowned gardens she had seen from the library, the grounds stretching away toward woods that marked the edge of the estate. A heavy oak door connected her room to the Viscount's chambers, but the bolt was firmly drawn on his side, a silent testament to the nature of their union. A maid waited by the fire, a young woman with kind eyes who curtsied deeply and introduced herself as Molly. "I have unpacked your things, my lady," Molly said softly, gesturing toward the wardrobe that now held Serafina's meager collection of mourning clothes and the few day dresses that had survived the confiscation of the Lockhart properties. "Mrs. Wickham, the housekeeper, says you are to ring if you need anything at all. Dinner is served at 7 o'clock in the small dining room, though his lordship often takes his meals in the library." "Thank you, Molly," Serafina managed, sinking onto the edge of the bed as the maid withdrew. Alone at last, she allowed herself to acknowledge the full weight of her circumstances. This was her life now. This cold house, this colder husband, this exile from everything she had once known. Her father's radical politics had purchased her this particular purgatory, and there was no appeal, no escape, no hope of anything resembling happiness. The days that followed brought an unexpected shift in Serafina's carefully ordered world. She established a routine that required no interaction with the Viscount, who was her husband in name only. She rose early, breaking her fast in her rooms before venturing out to explore the grounds when weather permitted. Ashmore Park revealed itself to be a place of faded grandeur, beautiful in the way of things that have been neglected but not forgotten. The gardens, though overgrown, held evidence of careful planning in earlier years. The library, which she visited only when certain Gabriel was elsewhere, contained treasures that spoke of generations of Westbrook scholarship. The servants treated her with careful courtesy, neither warm nor cold, simply correct. Mrs. Wickham, the housekeeper, provided keys to various rooms and explained the household routines with brisk efficiency. Serafina learned that Gabriel had been in residence at Ashmore Park for nearly 2 years, ever since his return from Vienna and the diplomatic disaster that had destroyed his career. He kept to himself, receiving no visitors and making no visits to neighboring estates. The servants whispered that he worked late into the night in the library, though no one could say what occupied him so completely. On the 5th day of her residence, Serafina encountered her husband by accident in the conservatory. She had thought the glass-walled room empty, having sought refuge there from the persistent rain that seemed to characterize Somerset in spring. She was examining a collection of rare plants that someone had tended with obvious care when Gabriel's voice startled her. "They were my mother's particular passion," he said from the doorway. Serafina spun around, her hand pressed to her chest. "She spent hours here," Gabriel continued, moving into the room, "coaxing impossible flowers to bloom in the English climate. I have tried to maintain them as she would have wished, though keeping the stovehouse warm enough requires constant vigilance." Serafina looked at the man who was her husband and saw for the first time something beyond the cold diplomat who had greeted her arrival. His cravat was loosened, his coat discarded, and there was dirt under his fingernails that suggested he had indeed been tending the plants himself, rather than leaving the task to gardeners. "They are beautiful," she said carefully. "The tropical specimens from the Indies are particularly fine. They require such specific conditions. Your mother must have been very dedicated." "She died when I was 12, Gabriel replied, picking up a watering can that sat on a wooden bench. My Aunt Octavia came to manage the household after that. She has very different priorities than my mother had. These plants have survived more through stubbornness than proper care. Lady Octavia Westbrook, Seraphina said, remembering the name from the brief explanation she had received of the family structure. The Crown Solicitor mentioned that she lives in London and disapproves of our marriage most vehemently. Something that might have been bitter amusement crossed Gabriel's face. My aunt disapproves of most things that fall outside her very narrow definition of propriety. She has written 3 times since our marriage, each letter more strident than the last, demanding that I annul this union and send you back to face justice. She considers you a contamination of the Westbrook bloodline. Then we have something in common, Seraphina said quietly. Society has made its judgment of us both. You for your diplomatic failure, I for my father's treason. We are equally tainted in their eyes. Gabriel set down the watering can and turned to face her fully, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The comparison is not equal, Lady Ashmore. Your crime was to be born to the wrong father. Mine was to trust the wrong man and watch good soldiers die because of my error in judgment. I chose my fate. You did not choose yours. No, Seraphina agreed, holding his gaze despite the temptation to look away. But we are both living with consequences we cannot change. Perhaps that is enough common ground to build something more than this cold civility. And what would you have us build? Gabriel asked, his voice carefully neutral. This is not a fairy tale, Miss Lockhart. I am not a hero from a novel who will be transformed by love into a better man. I am simply a failed diplomat hiding from his mistakes in the country. I ask for nothing more than basic human courtesy, Seraphina replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I do not expect love, my lord, but perhaps we might manage civility that is not quite so icy. We are bound together by forces neither of us controls. We might as well attempt to make our prison marginally less miserable. Gabriel studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift behind his eyes, some calculation being made and reconsidered. Finally, he nodded slowly. You have a bargain, Lady Ashmore. I will endeavor to be less churlish in my captivity if you will tolerate the company of a man society has rightly condemned. Society condemned me for crimes I did not commit, Seraphina pointed out. I am learning to question the reliability of society's judgment. The corner of Gabriel's mouth lifted in what might have been the ghost of a smile. A dangerous philosophy, my lady. Question society too thoroughly, and you may find yourself cast out entirely. I believe that ship has already sailed, my lord, Seraphina said with a touch of irony. We are both as cast out as it is possible to be while still breathing. This time Gabriel did smile, though the expression was tinged with sadness. True enough. Well then, shall we be outcasts together with marginally improved manners? I dine at 7, usually alone in the small dining room. You would be welcome to join me if the prospect does not seem entirely unbearable. I will consider it, Seraphina said, though she knew already that she would accept. Anything was preferable to more evenings alone with her thoughts and her regrets. Gabriel inclined his head in acknowledgement and returned to tending his mother's orchids, and Seraphina quietly withdrew, her mind turning over this unexpected development. The Viscount was not what she had expected. He carried his exile with a dignity that resonated with something deep in her own battered pride. Perhaps there was hope for something beyond mere survival in this strange arrangement. That evening, Seraphina dressed with more care than she had employed since arriving at Ashmore Park. Her wardrobe remained limited to morning clothes and the simplest of day dresses, but Molly helped her arrange her dark blonde hair in a style that was fashionable if understated, and she wore the single strand of pearls that had been her mother's and had somehow escaped confiscation. The small dining room was intimate, lit by the warm glow of beeswax candles. The table was set for 2, with places arranged not at opposite ends, but closer together. Gabriel rose when she entered, his manners impeccable despite their earlier agreement to less rigid civility. Lady Ashmore, he greeted her, pulling out her chair with his own hands rather than waiting for the footman to do so. Thank you for joining me. I confess I have grown weary of my own company these past months. As have I, Seraphina admitted, settling into her seat and accepting a glass of wine from the footman. though I suspect you have had rather longer to grow accustomed to solitude than I have." 2 years, Gabriel confirmed, taking his own seat across from her. 26 months of contemplating my failures and attempting to atone for sins that cannot be undone. It makes for tedious company, I assure you. The first course arrived, a delicate soup that spoke of a talented cook despite the household's reduced circumstances. They ate in silence for a few moments before Serafina ventured a question that had been troubling her since their conversation in the conservatory. "What happened in Vienna?" she asked. The Crown Solicitor mentioned a diplomatic disaster, but the details were not provided. "I know only that it was serious enough to end your career and send you into exile." Gabriel's hand tightened on his spoon, and for a moment she thought he would refuse to answer. Then he set the spoon down and met her eyes with that same intensity she had observed earlier. "I trusted the wrong source," he said flatly. "A man I had worked with for 3 years, someone I considered a friend, fed me information about French troop movements that proved to be deliberately false. I passed that information to military commanders who acted upon it, sending a company of English soldiers into what they believed was a lightly defended position. It was an ambush. 47 men died because I could not distinguish a loyal colleague from a French agent. The number hung in the air between them, 47. The stark pain in his voice struck Serafina like a physical blow. "You could not have known," she said softly. "If this man had fooled you for 3 years, he must have been extraordinarily skilled at deception." "That is what the inquiry concluded," Gabriel replied with bitter precision. "They found no evidence that I was complicit in the betrayal, but 47 families received death notices because of intelligence I provided. 47 mothers, wives, children who will never see their loved ones again. The inquiry may have cleared me of deliberate treason, but I am guilty nonetheless of catastrophic failure." "And so you exiled yourself here?" Serafina said, understanding flooding through her. "Not because society demanded it, but because you demanded it of yourself." "The only appropriate response to such failure," Gabriel confirmed. "I resigned my position, withdrew to Ashmore Park, and attempted to disappear as thoroughly as possible, until the government decided I could be useful one final time, by marrying the daughter of a traitor, and making both our embarrassments vanish into the Somerset countryside." Serafina set down her own spoon, her appetite fading as she absorbed the full weight of his confession. "Then we are both living with guilt for things beyond our control. I was not my father's confidant. I knew nothing of his funding of the Spencean radicals until the soldiers came to arrest him. But I am guilty nonetheless of bearing his name and his shame. Perhaps that is why they paired us so well," Gabriel said with grim humor. "2 failures, 2 sources of shame, locked together where we can contaminate no one else." "Or perhaps," Serafina ventured carefully, "we might help each other learn to live with what cannot be changed. You said in the conservatory that you are not some prince from a fairy tale. I am not some princess waiting to be rescued, but we are both human beings trying to survive circumstances we did not create. Surely there is some small comfort to be found in not facing that survival entirely alone." Gabriel studied her across the candle-lit table, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You are remarkably philosophical for someone who has lost everything, Lady Ashmore." "Serafina," she said impulsively, "if we are to be prisoners together, you might as well call me by my given name. Lady Ashmore sounds like someone else entirely." "Serafina," Gabriel repeated slowly, as though tasting the name. "It suits you. Angelic, with overtones of fire. Very well. I am Gabriel to my friends, though I confess I have few enough of those remaining." "Then I shall endeavor to be one," Serafina said, raising her wineglass in a small salute. "To unexpected alliances forged in exile." Gabriel lifted his own glass, and for the first time since her arrival at Ashmore Park, Serafina saw something almost approaching warmth in his grey eyes. "To unexpected alliances," he echoed. "May they prove less disastrous than my previous associations." The dinner continued with conversation that grew gradually easier, touching on books they had read, music they enjoyed, the peculiar beauty of Somerset in spring despite the persistent rain. Gabriel proved to be an engaging conversationalist when he chose to be, his years in diplomatic service having given him a wealth of stories and observations. Serafina found herself laughing at his dry wit, and when she caught the startled expression on his face at the sound, she realized he had not expected to provoke such a response. When the meal concluded, and Gabriel escorted her to the foot of the stairs leading to her wing, he paused and took her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her gloved knuckles with perfect propriety. "Thank you, Serafina," he said quietly. "This evening was considerably less bleak than most I have spent in recent memory." "For me as well," she replied honestly. "Perhaps we might repeat the experiment tomorrow?" "I would like that," Gabriel said, and the simplicity of the statement carried more weight than any elaborate declaration. Serafina climbed the stairs to her chambers with her heart feeling marginally lighter than it had in months. Perhaps survival need not be quite so cold and lonely as she had feared. The weeks that followed brought a transformation so gradual that Serafina barely noticed its progress until she looked back and recognized how far they had traveled from that first frigid greeting in the library. Dinners became a regular occurrence, and gradually their conversations expanded beyond the dining room. Gabriel began inviting her to join him in the library after meals, where they would read together in companionable silence or discuss the books they were consuming. Serafina discovered that her husband possessed a sharp intellect and a genuine love of literature that mirrored her own. They debated the merits of various poets, argued over Lord Byron's latest scandalous verse versus the propriety of Wordsworth, and found unexpected common ground in their appreciation for history. Gabriel also began including her in his work with the orchids in the conservatory. He explained the specific needs of each variety with a patience that surprised her, and she found herself genuinely interested in the challenge of coaxing such temperamental plants to thrive. There was something deeply satisfying about nurturing life in that glass-walled space, about creating beauty from careful attention and genuine care. One afternoon in late May, as spring finally began to assert itself over Somerset with determined sunshine, Gabriel suggested they ride out to inspect the tenant farms that dotted the Ashmore Park estate. Serafina had not been on horseback since before her father's arrest, but the prospect of escaping the house and its walls appealed strongly. The stablemaster provided her with a gentle mare named Willow, and Gabriel rode beside her on a grey gelding that reminded her painfully of the horses that had been sold from her father's stables. They rode in comfortable silence through lanes bordered by hedgerows heavy with May blossom, the air sweet with the scent of spring growth. "The estate has suffered from my neglect," Gabriel admitted, as they surveyed fields that showed signs of poor drainage and inadequate maintenance. "I have been so consumed with my own penance that I have failed in my responsibilities here as well. These people depend on Ashmore Park for their livelihoods, and I have given them little attention beyond ensuring their rents remain low and their cottages maintained." "It is not too late to change that," Serafina observed, studying the landscape with eyes that had learned to assess such things during her childhood in the country. "The land is good. The problems are ones of management, not fundamental flaws. With proper attention, the estate could be quite prosperous." Gabriel glanced at her with obvious surprise. "You understand estate management?" "My father's estates were extensive before his arrest," Serafina said, old pain flickering through her chest. "I often accompanied him on such inspections. He believed daughters should understand the sources of family wealth, even if we could not inherit it ourselves." Ironic, given that he was simultaneously planning treason that would destroy everything he claimed to value. They had stopped beneath an ancient oak tree that marked the intersection of two farm lanes, and Gabriel dismounted. He came to her side, hands reaching up to span her waist and lift her from the saddle. For a moment, as her feet touched the ground, she stood very close to him, close enough to see the concern in his grey eyes as he studied her face. "So you carry his sins as though they were your own," Gabriel said softly. "But you are not responsible for his choices, Serafina. You were his victim as much as anyone." "As were you a victim of your colleague's betrayal," Serafina countered, "yet you punish yourself as though you orchestrated the ambush yourself. Why is your guilt more valid than mine?" Gabriel's hands were still at her waist, and his fingers tightened slightly as he considered her question. "Perhaps," he admitted slowly, "we are both guilty of excessive penance. Perhaps we might learn to extend to ourselves the same mercy we seem capable of extending to each other." "A radical philosophy, my lord," Serafina said, very aware of his proximity and the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her riding habit. "Gabriel," he corrected gently. "We agreed you would call me Gabriel." "Gabriel," she repeated, and saw something flicker in his eyes that made her breath catch. They stood frozen in that moment, the spring air warm around them, birdsong filling the silence that stretched between them. Serafina found herself noticing details she had not permitted herself to acknowledge before: the strong line of his jaw, the way afternoon light turned his dark hair slightly auburn, the fullness of his lower lip. Gabriel seemed to be conducting his own inventory, his gaze traveling across her face with an intensity that made her heart race. His thumb moved against her waist, a small unconscious caress that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Serafina," he said, his voice rough with some emotion she could not name. "I find myself in danger of forgetting that this is merely a transaction. You make it remarkably difficult to maintain proper distance." "Is proper distance what you wish to maintain?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Before Gabriel could answer, a shout from one of the nearby farms shattered the moment. They sprang apart as a young boy came running down the lane, his face flushed with exertion and alarm. "My lord!" the boy gasped, skidding to a halt and offering a hasty bow. "My lord, begging your pardon, but there's been an accident at the Hartley farm. Tom Hartley's been caught under a fallen tree. They need help, my lord. They need help right away." Gabriel was moving instantly, swinging back into his saddle with fluid grace. "Show me," he commanded, and the boy scrambled to obey, running ahead down the lane. Serafina spurred Willow forward without waiting for assistance and followed, her heart pounding with a different sort of urgency now. They arrived at the Hartley farm to find a scene of muddy chaos. A massive oak had fallen during recent storms and finally toppled this afternoon, catching Tom Hartley's leg beneath its substantial trunk. A crowd of farm workers and neighbors had gathered, attempting to lever the tree off the injured man with lengths of timber, but their efforts were hampered by the tree's weight and the soft ground beneath. Gabriel dismounted and assessed the situation with the same calm precision Serafina imagined he had once employed in diplomatic crises. "We need more leverage and better positioning," he said to the assembled men. "And someone needs to ride to Taunton for the surgeon. That leg is badly damaged." He shrugged out of his coat and joined the men attempting to lift the tree, adding his strength to theirs while directing their efforts with clear authority. Serafina dismounted and went to Tom Hartley's wife, who knelt beside her husband's head, tears streaming down her face as she tried to comfort him. "He'll be well?" Serafina said with more confidence than she felt, taking the woman's trembling hand in her own. "His lordship will free him, and the surgeon will mend what is broken. You must be strong for him now." The woman, who could not have been more than 20, nodded and gripped Serafina's hand with desperate strength. Together they watched as Gabriel and the other men finally succeeded in lifting the tree enough for Tom to be pulled free. The injured man screamed as his shattered leg was moved, the sound turning Serafina's stomach. But Gabriel was there immediately, kneeling in the dirt to assess the damage. "The bone is shattered," Gabriel announced, his face grim. "We must splint it carefully before we move him, or the jagged edge will sever the artery. Mrs. Hartley, you will come with us. Young Timothy," he addressed the boy who had summoned them, "ride to Taunton as fast as that pony will carry you, and bring back Dr. Whitfield. Tell him the Viscount Ashmore commands his immediate attendance." The organized chaos of the rescue transformed into the organized chaos of transport. Tom Hartley was carefully lifted onto a makeshift stretcher. Serafina helped hold the man's shoulders down when he would have thrashed from the pain, while Gabriel bound the leg with strips of linen torn from a shirt. They carried him the 2 miles back to Ashmore Park's main house, with Gabriel walking beside him the entire way. By the time they reached Ashmore Park, the entire household had been mobilized. Mrs. Wickham directed the placement of Tom Hartley in a ground-floor guest room, and maids appeared with hot water, clean linens, and the household's modest medical supplies. Gabriel remained with the injured man, refusing to leave despite his dirt-stained shirt and the exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Serafina found herself coordinating the chaos almost without conscious thought. her childhood experience managing her father's estates coming to the fore. She ensured Mrs. Hartley was given tea and a private space to compose herself. She sent word to the Hartley farm that the children would be cared for by neighbors. She worked alongside the maids to prepare what the surgeon would need when he arrived. Dr. Whitfield appeared within 2 hours, a gruff man in his 50s who examined Tom Hartley with efficient competence. Gabriel and Serafina waited outside the room during the setting of the bone, the sounds from within making them both wince despite their determination to remain calm. When the surgeon finally emerged, he looked grim but not defeated. "The leg is set," he announced. "Whether he keeps it depends on the next few days. The risk of putrid fever is high. If infection sets in, I will have to amputate. If the bone heals clean, he should walk again, though he will likely limp for the rest of his life." "He will have the best care," Gabriel said firmly. "He will remain here at the house until he is well enough to be moved safely. Spare no expense for his treatment, Doctor. Whatever he needs, he will have." Dr. Whitfield nodded approval. "I will return tomorrow to check the wound and change the dressings. If anything changes before then, send for me immediately." After the surgeon departed, Gabriel finally allowed himself to sink into a chair in the library, his head falling back against the cushion with exhausted relief. Serafina, who had followed him there, poured him a generous measure of brandy without asking if he wanted it. "Drink," she commanded gently, pressing the glass into his hand. "You have earned it thrice over." Gabriel accepted the brandy and drank deeply, then fixed her with an assessing look. "You were extraordinary today," he said quietly. "The way you managed the household, comforted Mrs. Hartley, anticipated what was needed. You have a gift for such things." Serafina felt warmth spread through her chest at the praise. "I did only what needed doing." "No," Gabriel contradicted. "You did considerably more than that. You took command of a crisis with grace and competence. Tom Hartley is alive in part because you ensured everything was ready when the surgeon arrived." He paused, studying her with those penetrating grey eyes. "I have been unfair to you, Serafina. I thought of you as merely the burden I was required to bear as penance for my failures. But you are not a burden. You are remarkable." The unexpected compliment made Serafina's throat tighten with emotion she had not permitted herself to feel in months. "As are you," she said softly. "The way you commanded that rescue, the care you showed for your tenant, the responsibility you took for his well-being, that is not the behavior of a failed diplomat hiding from his mistakes. That is the behavior of a good man trying to do right by those who depend on him." Gabriel set down his brandy glass and rose, crossing the small space between them with deliberate purpose. He took both her hands in his grip warm and firm. "We make an unexpectedly effective alliance, you and I," he said, his voice low and intense. "I had thought this marriage would be nothing but cold civility and shared exile, but I find myself hoping for something more, something I have no right to ask for, and you have no obligation to provide." Serafina's heart was racing so fast she could barely breathe. "What do you hope for, Gabriel?" "A true union," he said simply. "Not the political arrangement we were forced into, but a genuine bond built on mutual respect and growing affection. I am not fool enough to speak of love after only 6 weeks of acquaintance, but I believe we might build something real if we chose to try." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, shattered the last of Serafina's defenses. She had entered this marriage as a prisoner, with no hope of anything resembling happiness. But this man, who carried his own burdens of guilt and shame, was offering her a choice. He was asking, not demanding. He was hoping, not expecting. "I would like to try," Serafina heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I would like very much to build something real with you." Gabriel's relief was visible in the way his shoulders dropped and his grip on her hands tightened. "Then we shall try together," he said. "Though I warn you, I am quite terrible at this sort of thing. My previous attempts at courtship were spectacularly unsuccessful." "As were mine," Serafina admitted with a small laugh that held more joy than she had felt in months. "But perhaps we will be less terrible together than we were separately." "A romantic sentiment worthy of the poets," Gabriel said with dry humor, though his eyes were warm with something that might have been tenderness. "We shall inscribe it on our family crest, the Westbrooks, less terrible together." Serafina laughed properly then, and Gabriel smiled at the sound. That same startled, pleased expression she had seen at their first dinner together. Then, with careful deliberation, he raised one of her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm rather than her knuckles, an intimate gesture that sent shivers racing up her arm. "Thank you, Serafina," he said quietly, "for agreeing to take this chance, for not condemning me to the cold isolation I believed I deserved, for being far braver than I have been." "We will be brave together," Serafina replied, squeezing his hand, "and perhaps in time we will learn to be happy as well." That night, Serafina lay awake in her bed in the East Wing and thought about the unexpected turn her life had taken. She had come to Ashmore Park as a convicted traitor's daughter, expecting nothing but cold endurance and slow suffocation of spirit. Instead, she had found a man as wounded as herself, one who was willing to reach across the abyss of their shared exile and offer genuine connection. It was not love, not yet, but it was hope, and hope was considerably more than she had dared to dream of in the long, dark months since her father's execution. The following weeks brought a new warmth to Ashmore Park that had nothing to do with the advancing summer. Gabriel and Serafina fell into a pattern of genuine companionship that surprised them both with its ease and its depth. They spent hours together in the library and conservatory, but also began venturing further afield, riding out to visit the tenant farms and involving themselves in the practical work of estate management. Serafina's suggestions for improved drainage and crop rotation were implemented with enthusiastic support from Gabriel, who seemed energized by having a purpose beyond brooding over past failures. Tom Hartley's recovery proceeded better than anyone had dared hope. He retained his leg, though Dr. Whitfield's prediction of a permanent limp proved accurate. Gabriel ensured the young farmer would want for nothing during his convalescence, and went further, offering him a position as assistant gamekeeper once he had healed sufficiently, recognizing that heavy farm labor might prove too taxing for the injured leg. The household staff, who had initially treated Serafina with careful neutrality, began to warm to their new mistress as they observed her genuine care for their welfare and her increasingly obvious unity with their master. Mrs. Wickham actually smiled at Serafina one morning, a remarkable achievement given the housekeeper's usual stern demeanor. But contentment, Serafina would soon discover, was a fragile thing in the unforgiving world of the ton. The letter arrived on the last day of June, delivered by special courier from London. Gabriel read it in the library with Serafina seated across from him, and she watched his expression darken with each line he consumed. "My aunt," he said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Lady Octavia Westbrook has decided that our continued existence in peaceful obscurity is unacceptable. She writes to inform me that she has been making inquiries in London, gathering information about your father's associates and co-conspirators. She implies rather strongly that she believes you may have been more involved in his schemes than the government suspects." Serafina felt ice flood her veins. "That is absurd. I knew nothing of my father's activities. The inquiry cleared me of any involvement." "The inquiry cleared you for lack of evidence," Gabriel corrected grimly. "Octavia is clever enough to understand the distinction. She suggests that if evidence were to surface proving your complicity, our marriage could be annulled, and you could be tried properly. She is hunting for that evidence with considerable determination." "Can she do that?" Serafina asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can she truly overturn the government's decision to dispose of my case through marriage?" Gabriel set down the letter with carefully controlled precision. "If she can prove you lied during the inquiry, or that new evidence has come to light demonstrating your active participation in treason, then yes. The marriage contract included provisions for annulment under such circumstances. The government was protecting itself in case the political winds shifted. Furthermore," he paused, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "she mentions the bloodline. She claims she cannot allow a traitor's blood to pollute the Westbrook air. She wants to destroy you to save the family name." "Then I am not safe at all," Serafina said quietly, the happiness of the past weeks crumbling like ash in her hands. "This has all been temporary, a brief respite before the inevitable reckoning." "No," Gabriel said fiercely, rising from his chair and moving to kneel before hers. taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "No, Serafina. I will not allow her to destroy this. I will not allow her to destroy you. Octavia has always been vindictive, but she has gone too far this time. I will fight her with every resource at my disposal." "She is your aunt," Serafina protested. "Your family." "You are my wife," Gabriel countered with intensity that made her breath catch. "That is a bond that supersedes blood relation. I chose you, Serafina, perhaps not initially, but I choose you now, and I will not let her tear apart what we are building." Serafina wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his protection would be sufficient, but she had learned the hard way that wanting something did not make it true. "What does she want?" she asked instead. "There must be something. People like your aunt do not act without motive beyond pure malice." Gabriel's expression grew even grimmer. "She wants me to return to London, to resume my place in society and pursue the political rehabilitation she believes I deserve. She has never accepted my choice to withdraw to Somerset. She sees our marriage as the final proof that I have given up on reclaiming the Westbrook name's former glory. She wants to end this union so that I might marry someone she considers appropriate, someone who would enhance rather than taint our family's reputation." "Then perhaps you should give her what she wants," Serafina said, though the words tasted like poison. "Perhaps you should let me go, return to London, rebuild your life as she wishes. You have already sacrificed enough for my sake." "I have sacrificed nothing for your sake," Gabriel said sharply, his grip on her hands tightening almost to the point of pain. "Everything I gave up because of my own failures, long before you entered my life. You have given me back something I thought I had lost forever. You have reminded me that life exists beyond guilt and penance. I will not surrender that. I will not surrender you." The fierce determination in his voice, in his eyes, in every line of his body, overwhelmed Serafina's defenses entirely. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I am afraid that I have finally found something worth living for, and it will be ripped away just as everything else has been ripped away." Gabriel released her hands only to cup her face instead, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "Then we will face that fear together," he said softly. "We will go to London. We will attend the season's remaining events. We will force society to acknowledge us, and we will demonstrate to my aunt that you have nothing to hide. We will face this threat head-on rather than cowering in Somerset, hoping it will pass us by." "You would do that?" Serafina asked, searching his face for any sign of doubt or reservation. "You would subject yourself to society's judgment again for me?" "For us," Gabriel corrected. "This is not charity, Serafina. This is self-preservation. I have found something real with you, something I had not believed myself capable of after Vienna. I will not lose it without a fight, even if that fight requires me to face the very people I have spent 2 years avoiding." Serafina leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his steadiness. "When do we leave?" "As soon as arrangements can be made," Gabriel replied. "The season is winding down, but there are still weeks of events remaining. We will make our appearance. We will be beyond reproach in our conduct. And we will show Octavia and the rest of the ton that we have nothing to fear from their scrutiny." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like both protection and promise. Serafina buried her face against his shoulder and allowed herself to believe, for just a moment, that his strength would be enough to carry them both through the coming storm. But even as she took comfort in his arms, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a truth she could not entirely ignore. Men made promises they could not keep. Her father had promised to provide for his family, and he had destroyed them instead. Gabriel meant well, but good intentions were no guarantee against the implacable machinery of society's judgment. Still, she had no better option than to trust him. So she would go to London, she would face the ton's scrutiny, and she would hope that together they could survive what was coming. Though hope, she had learned, was a dangerous indulgence for women like her. London in late June was hot and crowded and utterly unforgiving. The Westbrook townhouse in Grosvenor Square had been shut up since Gabriel's departure 2 years prior, and the week of frantic preparation required to make it habitable again gave Serafina a glimpse of what Ashmore Park must have been like before neglect set in. The house was elegant, expensively furnished, and designed to impress. It felt nothing like the comfortable if slightly shabby Somerset estate that had become her refuge. They arrived on a Wednesday evening, too late for any social engagements, but early enough to begin the delicate process of alerting society to their presence. Gabriel sent cards to several families he had once counted as friends, announcing that the Viscount and Viscountess Ashmore were in residence and receiving callers. The responses that trickled back over the next 2 days were illuminating in their absence. Of the 20 cards sent, only 3 families responded with any warmth. The rest were coolly polite refusals or, more damningly, no response at all. "We are pariahs," Serafina observed, reading through the stack of returned cards with a sinking heart. "They will not receive us, Gabriel. Your return to London changes nothing in their eyes. Then we will force them to see us," Gabriel replied with grim determination. "Almack's assembly rooms continue their subscription balls through the end of the season. We will attend. The patronesses may refuse us vouchers, but I have connections that run deeper than their petty disapproval." He was as good as his word. Through a combination of old diplomatic contacts and sheer stubborn persistence, Gabriel secured vouchers for the following Wednesday's ball at Almack's. Serafina spent the intervening days in a state of increasing anxiety, knowing that their appearance at the most exclusive venue in London would either open doors or slam them permanently shut. She had nothing suitable to wear. Her morning clothes were obviously inappropriate, and her limited collection of day dresses would mark her immediately as poor. Gabriel, understanding this without needing explanation, sent for a modiste and ordered a complete wardrobe for his wife, with instructions that cost was irrelevant and everything must be ready within 4 days. The result was a gown of silver-grey silk with delicate embroidery in darker thread, cut in the height of fashion and tailored to fit Serafina's figure perfectly. It matched the Westbrook livery and, more importantly, Gabriel's eyes. When she descended the stairs on Wednesday evening, dressed for her first appearance in London society, Gabriel stopped mid-motion and stared at her with an expression that made her cheeks flush. "You are breathtaking," he said simply, offering his arm. "Every eye in that ballroom will be drawn to you and every tongue will be forced to acknowledge that the Viscountess Ashmore is not some cowering criminal, but a lady of grace and dignity." "I hope you are right," Serafina murmured, taking his arm with fingers that trembled slightly, despite her determination to appear calm. "Because if you are wrong, this will be a humiliation beyond recovery." The carriage ride to Almack's assembly rooms passed in tense silence. When they arrived, Gabriel handed her down with careful courtesy and offered his arm, his posture radiating confidence that Serafina desperately wished she felt. They climbed the stairs together and passed through the entrance into the main ballroom. The effect of their arrival was immediate and devastating. Conversation died in ripples as they crossed the threshold, spreading outward from their position like stones thrown into still water. Heads turned, fans snapped open to facilitate whispered exchanges, and the general hum of polite society transformed into pointed silence. Serafina felt the weight of hundreds of judgmental stares, saw the curl of lips into sneers of disdain, noticed the deliberate turning of backs as people chose to cut them directly. "Steady," Gabriel murmured into her ear, his hand tightening on her arm. "Do not let them see weakness. We are here by right, and we have nothing to be ashamed of." They made their way through the hostile crowd toward the refreshment room, Gabriel greeting those few who acknowledged them with calm courtesy. Serafina kept her chin high and her expression serene, though her heart was pounding so hard she feared everyone could hear it. It was near the punch bowl that they encountered Lady Octavia Westbrook for the first time. Gabriel's aunt was a handsome woman in her late 50s, dressed in purple silk that screamed wealth and status. Her dark hair, liberally threaded with silver, was arranged in an elaborate coiffure topped with an ostrich plume. Her eyes, the same grey as Gabriel's but infinitely colder, fixed on Serafina with undisguised loathing. "Nephew," she said, her voice carrying across the space with calculated volume. "How extraordinarily brave of you to show your face in polite company again, though I question your judgment in bringing that creature with you." Serafina felt Gabriel tense beside her, but his voice remained level when he responded. "Aunt Octavia, may I present my wife, Serafina, Viscountess Ashmore?" "Seraphina, this is Lady Octavia Westbrook, my father's sister." "Lady Octavia," Seraphina said with a curtsy that was precisely correct, neither too deep nor too shallow. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance." "Are you indeed?" Octavia's smile was a predator's expression, all teeth and no warmth. "How fascinating. I confess I am less pleased to make yours, child. You see, I have been making extensive inquiries into your family history. Your father's treason is well documented, but I find myself intrigued by certain gaps in the record, gaps that suggest someone was protecting you during the inquiry, someone who perhaps had reasons to doubt your innocence." "My wife was thoroughly investigated and cleared of all suspicion," Gabriel said sharply. "The government concluded she had no knowledge of her father's activities. The government concluded they had insufficient evidence to prosecute," Octavia corrected with poisonous precision. "Not quite the same thing as innocence, is it? And evidence has a way of surfacing when one looks carefully enough." "What are you implying, Aunt?" Gabriel demanded, his careful calm finally cracking to reveal the anger beneath. "I am implying nothing, dear nephew. I am stating plainly that I believe your wife to be a traitor who has escaped justice through political expediency. And I am stating equally plainly that I will not rest until the truth is exposed and this mockery of a marriage is dissolved as it should have been from the beginning." She turned her cold gaze back to Seraphina. "Enjoy this evening, child. It may well be your last in polite society before you find yourself facing the charges you so narrowly avoided." With that devastating pronouncement, Octavia swept away, leaving Gabriel and Seraphina standing frozen in the wake of her malice. Around them, Seraphina could hear the whispers intensifying, could see the speculative looks and knowing smirks. The damage was done. Octavia had accomplished precisely what she intended, casting doubt on Seraphina's innocence in the most public venue possible. "We should leave," Seraphina said quietly, her voice steady despite the nausea churning in her stomach. "Remaining here will only make things worse." "No," Gabriel said firmly. "We will not give her the satisfaction. We will stay. We will dance. We will show everyone in this room that we have nothing to hide and nothing to fear." Before Seraphina could protest, Gabriel led her onto the dance floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. She had not waltzed in years, but her body remembered the steps. And Gabriel was an excellent partner, guiding her through the movements with confidence and grace. Around them, the other couples maintained careful distance as though proximity might contaminate them, but Gabriel and Seraphina danced as though they were alone in the world. As they spun, Seraphina caught the eye of Lady Jersey, the most fearsome of the patronesses. For a terrifying moment she expected to be escorted out, but the great lady gave a barely perceptible nod, sanctioning the dance and saving them from total ruin. "I am sorry," Gabriel said softly as they moved together. "I am sorry I brought you to this. I thought I could protect you, but I have only exposed you to further cruelty." "You could not have known she would be so bold," Seraphina replied, looking up into his face and seeing genuine anguish there. "And you have not abandoned me, which is more than I could have asked." "I will never abandon you," Gabriel promised fiercely. "Whatever evidence she claims to have found, whatever accusations she levels, I will stand with you. I swear it, Seraphina." The waltz ended, and they made their way from the dance floor with heads high despite the hostile stares that followed them. They stayed precisely 1 hour more, making their presence felt and refusing to slink away like beaten dogs. Only when the appropriate interval had passed did Gabriel finally guide Seraphina toward the exit. They had nearly reached the door when a woman Seraphina did not recognize stepped deliberately into their path. She was young and beautiful, with dark curls and a gown of emerald silk that must have cost a fortune. "Lord Ashmore," the woman purred, her voice carrying a familiarity that made Seraphina's stomach clench. "How delightful to see you back in London, though I confess surprise at your choice of companion. I had thought you preferred ladies of more substantial breeding." "Lady Cassandra," Gabriel said coolly, his arm tightening protectively around Seraphina's waist. "I see your manners have not improved during my absence. Allow me to present my wife." "Your wife?" Cassandra repeated with mock surprise. "My dear Lord Ashmore, surely you jest. This cannot be the same creature who was nearly hanged alongside her treasonous father. Though I suppose if one's own reputation is already ruined, There is little harm in marrying down even further. The cutting remark, delivered with a smile that suggested she was making polite conversation, struck like a physical blow. Serafina felt Gabriel's entire body tense, felt him preparing to respond with devastating effect, but she placed her hand on his arm in restraint. "Lady Cassandra," Serafina said with icy politeness that matched the other woman's false sweetness. "I confess I am unfamiliar with your family name, but I have always believed that pity is a rare virtue, almost as rare as good breeding. I do hope you enjoy the remainder of the ball." She guided Gabriel past the stunned woman before Cassandra could formulate a response, and together they finally escaped into the cool night air. The carriage was waiting, and they climbed inside in silence that lasted until they were well away from Almack's. Only then did Gabriel begin to laugh, a sound that started as a chuckle and built into genuine mirth. "That was magnificent," he said when he could speak again. "Did you see her face? No one has put Cassandra Havershaw in her place so neatly in years. She will be absolutely furious." "I may have made things worse," Serafina said, though she could not entirely suppress her own smile at the memory of Cassandra's shocked expression. "You defended yourself with wit and grace," Gabriel countered. "That is never a mistake, regardless of consequences. I am in awe of your strength." "I am not strong," Serafina said quietly. "I am terrified. Your aunt's threats were not idle, Gabriel. She means to destroy me, and through me destroy any chance you have of rebuilding your life." "Then she will fail," Gabriel said with certainty, "because I will not let her succeed. Tomorrow I will begin my own investigation into her claims. If she has evidence, I will find it first and determine its validity. And if she has fabricated evidence, I will expose her fraud before she can use it against you." Serafina wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his determination would be enough. But as the carriage rattled through London's dark streets toward Grosvenor Square, she could not shake the cold certainty that they were racing toward disaster, and all the strength and good intentions in the world might not be enough to save them. The following 3 weeks were among the most difficult of Serafina's life. Gabriel was true to his word, throwing himself into investigation of his aunt's claims with the same focused intensity he must have once employed in diplomatic work. He spent long hours closeted with solicitors and investigators, reviewing records of the inquiry into her father's treason, searching for any hint of what evidence Octavia might have uncovered or fabricated. Meanwhile, Serafina found herself alone in the Grosvenor Square townhouse, a prisoner once again, but this time with gilded bars. She dared not venture out for fear of encountering the hostile society that had made its position clear at Almack's. The few calling cards that arrived were from people seeking scandal and gossip, not genuine connection, and she refused to receive them. The isolation wore on her spirit in ways that even her darkest days at Ashmore Park had not. There she had been alone but free to roam the grounds and find solace in nature. Here she was trapped in a house that felt nothing like home, surrounded by a city full of people who despised her, waiting for an axe that she knew would eventually fall. Gabriel noticed her declining spirits and tried to comfort her, but his own exhaustion and frustration were obvious. His investigation had revealed nothing concrete, no evidence that Octavia possessed anything beyond speculation and malice. But absence of evidence was not proof of safety, and they both knew it. The crisis came on a sweltering afternoon in late July, when London was at its most unbearable and tempers frayed under the relentless heat. Gabriel burst into the drawing room, where Serafina sat attempting to read, his face flushed with fury and something that looked dangerously like despair. "I have it," he announced without preamble. "I have proof of what Octavia has been doing, but it damns us." Serafina set down her book with hands that trembled slightly. "What proof?" "Letters," Gabriel said, tossing a packet of papers onto the table before her. "Correspondence, allegedly between you and a known French agent, Claude Beaumont. Octavia has been showing them selectively to members of Parliament, building a case that you were your father's accomplice and that the inquiry was deliberately sabotaged to protect you. They are dated to January and February of this year." Serafina's vision narrowed to a single point as she stared at the letters. She reached out and took one, reading the script. "But I wrote no such correspondence. I never communicated with any of my father's associates. These must be forgeries." "They look authentic," Gabriel said, pacing the room. "The seal is correct. The handwriting is a perfect match for yours. Octavia has been thorough." "Wait," Serafina said, her voice rising with sudden realization. She looked closer at the date on the top letter. January 14th, 1817. "Gabriel, look at the date." "I know," he said, rubbing his face with his hands. "It places you in communication with him right before your father's arrest." "No," Serafina stood up, the paper clutching in her hand. "You don't understand. Claude Beaumont. I remember that name. I remember reading it in the Morning Chronicle last summer because my father was so agitated by the news." Gabriel stopped pacing and looked at her. "What news?" "Claude Beaumont was executed by the French government in July of 1816, Serafina declared, a fierce hope blooming in her chest. 6 months before the date on this letter. He was physically incapable of receiving letters in January because he was dead and buried in Paris." Gabriel stared at her, silence stretching in the room. Then a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Dead. Octavia used the name of a real agent to lend authenticity, but failed to check the dates of his demise. "We have her," Serafina breathed. "We can prove she has been fabricating evidence." "Better than that," Gabriel said, his grey eyes blazing. "I can prove she has been bribing a clerk in the Foreign Office to provide her with official seals and paper stock. My investigator found the man, but without the error in the letters, it was just his word against hers. With this, she is finished." "When do we act?" Serafina asked, her mind racing through the implications. "Tonight," Gabriel said. "There is a ball at the Westbrook family townhouse, hosted by my aunt to celebrate what she believes will be her triumph over us. We will attend that ball and we will reveal her crimes before the very people she sought to convince of your guilt." "She will never allow us through the door," Serafina protested, though her heart was beginning to race. "She has made no secret of her hatred for me. She invited me specifically," Gabriel countered with a grim smile. "The invitation arrived this morning along with a letter suggesting I might wish to discuss terms for dissolving our marriage quietly before she was forced to make her evidence public. She believes she has won. She believes I will come to her ball, see the damage she has prepared, and capitulate to her demands. Instead, I will bring you with me, and we will destroy her facade before everyone who matters." Serafina wanted to object, wanted to point out the 1,000 ways this plan could go wrong, but the fierce determination in Gabriel's eyes stopped her. He had fought for her, had defended her, had refused to abandon her even when society demanded it. The least she could do was trust him now, when he promised vindication. "Very well," she said quietly. "We will go to your aunt's ball and we will face this final battle together." Gabriel's answering smile was fierce and triumphant. "Together," he agreed, "as we have faced everything else." That evening, Serafina dressed in the gown of silver-grey silk that Gabriel had commissioned. Molly wove pearls through her mistress's upswept hair and fastened a necklace of sapphires and diamonds around her throat, a family heirloom Gabriel had presented to her that afternoon, with instructions to wear them proudly. "You look like a queen," Molly said softly. "You look like someone who cannot be defeated." "Let us hope appearances are not deceiving," Serafina replied, studying her reflection with critical eyes. She did look different than the frightened girl who had arrived at Ashmore Park 4 months ago. There was steel in her spine now, fire in her eyes. Gabriel had given her that. He had shown her that she was worth fighting for, and that knowledge had transformed her in ways that went deeper than any gown or jewels. Gabriel was waiting at the foot of the stairs, devastatingly handsome in black evening clothes that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression, something raw and unguarded that made Serafina's breath catch. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said simply, "and you are mine. No matter what happens tonight, remember that. You are mine and I am yours, and that is worth more than all of society's approval combined." Serafina descended the final steps and took the hand he offered, feeling the solid warmth of his grip anchor her in the present moment. "Let us finish this," she said. "Let us face your aunt and her malice, and let us emerge victorious or fall together." "We will not fall," Gabriel promised. "I will not allow it." The Westbrook townhouse blazed with light when their carriage arrived, and the sound of music and laughter spilled out into the summer night. Gabriel handed Serafina down with careful courtesy, and together they mounted the steps to face what awaited within. The butler at the door looked shocked to see them, but could not refuse entry when Gabriel presented his invitation. They passed through into the crowded ballroom, and once again conversation died as their presence registered. But this time, Serafina did not feel the crushing weight of shame. This time she had truth on her side, and a husband who had proven himself willing to fight the world for her sake. Lady Octavia appeared almost immediately, her face a mask of false welcome that did not reach her cold grey eyes. "Gabriel, how delightful that you could attend. Though I confess surprise that you brought your unfortunate companion. Surely you received my letter suggesting a more private discussion would be appropriate." "I received your letter," Gabriel confirmed pleasantly, "and I found its contents fascinating, as I found the forged correspondence you have been showing to members of Parliament equally fascinating. Shall we discuss the matter here before all your guests, or would you prefer more privacy?" Octavia's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. "I'm sure I have no idea what you mean." "No," Gabriel's voice hardened. "Then perhaps I should clarify. I refer to the letters you claim prove my wife's complicity in her father's treason. The letters allegedly exchanged between Lady Ashmore and a French agent named Claude Beaumont. The letters dated to January and February of 1817. "Those letters are genuine," Octavia declared, though Serafina heard the first note of panic in her voice. "I have had them authenticated by experts." Gabriel reached into his coat and produced the packet of letters, holding them out toward her, but not letting go. "Then your experts are either complicit in your fraud or incompetent," he said with devastating calm. "Because Claude Beaumont was executed by the French government in July of 1816, 6 months before the dates on your forged correspondence. He was physically incapable of receiving letters on the dates you claim, as he was dead and buried in Paris." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests, and Serafina saw Octavia's face go pale. "That is impossible," the older woman whispered, staring at the damning papers in Gabriel's hand. "I had those letters from a reliable source." "You had those letters from a Foreign Office clerk named Thomas Fletcher, whom you bribed with the sum of £200 to provide you with official seals and paper stock," Gabriel continued remorselessly. "Fletcher has confessed everything, Aunt. He has provided a sworn statement detailing exactly how you manufactured evidence against my wife, evidence you intended to use to force the annulment of our marriage." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Every eye was fixed on Lady Octavia, whose mask of confidence had shattered completely. "You are lying," she said desperately. "You would say anything to protect that traitor's daughter." "I am protecting my wife," Gabriel corrected, his voice ringing with conviction. "My innocent wife, whom you have attempted to destroy through fabricated evidence and malicious gossip. You accuse her of following in her father's footsteps, but it is you who have committed crimes, bribery, forgery, conspiracy to bring false charges. These are serious offenses, Aunt. Offenses that could see you facing the very justice you sought to inflict on Serafina." Octavia's eyes darted around the room, seeking allies or escape routes, but found only horrified fascination in the faces of her guests. "She has bewitched you," the older woman said, her voice rising with desperation. "She has made you forget your duty to family and honor. I did this to save you from her contamination, to save the bloodline." "You did this," Gabriel said coldly, "to satisfy your own vindictive nature and your obsession with controlling my life. You could not accept my choice to withdraw from society after Vienna. You could not tolerate my marriage to someone you deemed unworthy. So you manufactured a crisis to force me to bend to your will. But you underestimated both my wife's innocence and my determination to protect her." He turned to address the room at large, his voice carrying to every corner. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you tonight not as the failed diplomat who fled to Somerset in shame, but as a man who has found something worth more than society's fickle approval. I stand here with my wife, who has been unjustly accused and cruelly persecuted, and I declare before all of you that I would rather live in exile with her than be embraced by a society built on such malicious hypocrisy." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Serafina felt tears prick her eyes as she understood what Gabriel was doing. He was not merely defending her. He was choosing her deliberately, publicly, irrevocably. He was sacrificing whatever hope remained of his political rehabilitation, whatever chance he might have had to reclaim his former position, all to stand with her against the forces arrayed against them. "Gabriel," she whispered, but he turned to her with such love in his eyes that her words died unspoken. "I choose you, Serafina," he said softly, though his voice carried in the hushed ballroom. "I chose you when I agreed to this marriage. I chose you again every day we spent together at Ashmore Park. And I choose you now before God and all these witnesses. You are my wife, my consort, my salvation, and no amount of scandal or disapproval will change that truth." Serafina felt the last of her defenses crumble. This man, this remarkable man who had every reason to be bitter and closed, had opened his heart to her completely. He had given her not just protection, but genuine love, and he was willing to pay any price to keep her safe. "I choose you as well," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I choose you every hour of every day, Gabriel Westbrook. You are my husband, my home, my heart." The first person to applaud was a young woman Serafina did not know, but others quickly joined until the entire ballroom echoed with the sound. It was not the universal approval of society, but it was acknowledgement, acceptance, recognition that what Gabriel and Serafina shared was real and worthy of respect. Lady Octavia stood frozen in the center of her own ballroom, defeated and exposed, as her guests witnessed her complete humiliation. When she finally moved, it was to gather her skirts and flee the room, her face flushed with fury and shame. Gabriel watched her go with an expression of grim satisfaction. "She will not trouble us again," he said quietly to Serafina. "I will see to it that the authorities are informed of her crimes. At minimum, she will face social consequences that will destroy any influence she once wielded." "You have made an enemy of your aunt," Serafina said. "She is your family, Gabriel. Perhaps we should have found a quieter way to resolve this." "She ceased to be family when she attempted to destroy you," Gabriel replied firmly. "Family protects each other. They do not fabricate evidence and spread malicious lies. I have no regrets about tonight, Serafina, do you?" "None," Serafina admitted, leaning into his solid warmth. "Though I confess to being exhausted. Might we go home?" "We can go anywhere you wish," Gabriel said, pressing a kiss to her temple that made her heart flutter. "Where would you like to be, my darling wife?" Serafina considered the question. London held nothing for them now but painful memories and society's reluctant acceptance. Ashmore Park, for all its initial coldness, had become home during their months of exile. It was where they had learned to trust each other, to build something real from the ashes of their respective disasters. "Somerset," she said decisively. "I want to go back to Somerset, to Ashmore Park and our gardens and our tenant farms. I want to build the life we started there, away from all of this cruelty and judgment." Gabriel's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "Then we shall go home to Somerset," he agreed. "We shall return to Ashmore Park and never set foot in London again, unless we choose to do so. We shall build our life together in peace, and we shall be happy in our exile." "Not exile," Serafina corrected softly. "Choice. We are choosing each other and the life we want, rather than accepting what society demands. That is not exile, my love. That is freedom." "Freedom," Gabriel repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, I believe you are right. After 2 years of imprisonment in guilt and shame, I am finally free. Free because of you, Serafina. Free because you taught me that redemption is not found in society's approval, but in choosing to live with integrity and love." They left the Westbrook townhouse that night with heads high and hearts light, and within 3 days had departed London entirely. The journey back to Somerset felt less like retreat than homecoming, and when Ashmore Park finally came into view at the end of the long gravel drive, Serafina felt something in her chest ease for the first time in months. "Welcome home, Lady Ashmore," Gabriel said softly, as the carriage rolled to a stop before the grey stone manor. "Welcome home, my lord," Serafina replied, taking his hand as he helped her down. Welcome to the life we have chosen, and the love we have earned. The months that followed were not perfect, but they were deeply, profoundly happy. Gabriel and Serafina settled into the rhythms of country life with the ease of people who had found where they belonged. They worked together to improve the estate, implementing the drainage and crop rotation schemes they had planned. They tended Gabriel's mother's orchids in the conservatory, coaxing new blooms from the temperamental plants. They rode out across the Somerset countryside, visiting tenant farms and involving themselves in the practical details of land management. The scandal in London faded, as scandals always do, replaced by newer and more immediate gossip. Lady Octavia Westbrook was quietly exiled to a distant property in Scotland, her reputation destroyed and her influence evaporated. A few brave souls from their former social circle ventured letters of tentative reconciliation, but Gabriel and Serafina felt no pressing need to respond. They had found something more valuable than society's approval. They had found each other. On a cool evening in late October, as autumn painted Somerset in shades of gold and crimson, Gabriel found Serafina in the conservatory, tending the orchids that had become their shared passion. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest with easy affection. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "A dangerous occupation," Serafina teased, leaning into his embrace. "What momentous thoughts occupy the mind of the Viscount Ashmore this evening?" "I have been thinking about the first day you arrived here," Gabriel admitted. "How cold I was, how determined to maintain distance, how certain I was that our marriage would be nothing but mutual suffering. I was so wrong, Serafina. You saved me from myself. You taught me how to live again." "You saved me as well," Serafina replied, turning in his arms to face him. "I came here expecting prison, and you gave me freedom. I expected isolation, and you gave me union. I expected coldness, and you gave me love. We saved each other, Gabriel." "Then we are fortunate indeed," Gabriel said, cupping her face in his hands with infinite tenderness, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are my home, Serafina. Not this house, not Somerset, not any place or property. You are where I belong." "And you are mine," Serafina whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him with all the love and gratitude that filled her heart. "My home, my heart, my everything." They stood together in the conservatory as night fell outside, surrounded by the flowers they had nurtured and the life they had built from ruins. Two wounded souls who had found healing in each other, two exiles who had discovered that home was not a place but a choice, a commitment, a love that endured despite and because of everything they had survived. Society might consider them failures, criminals bound together by government decree. But Gabriel and Serafina knew a different truth. They were allies who had earned their happiness through courage, loyalty, and the willingness to choose each other when the world demanded they stand alone. And that truth was worth more than all the approval and acclaim society could ever offer. Thank you so much for journeying with us through this tale of redemption and resilient love. If this story of courage, loyalty, and choosing love against all odds touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, hope, and triumph over adversity. Until next time, may you find your own unexpected happiness.